Karen stepped into the shadowy garage, unaware that her every move was being watched. The alarm system, rigged by a previous tenant, began to blare. Little did she know, this would set off a chain of events that would turn her world upside down. What happened next would leave her clinging to her freedom and fighting for her life. Karen tightened the strap of her gym bag as she entered the dimly lit garage. The air was musty, and the sound of her footsteps echoed against the concrete walls. She quickened her pace, eager to get home after a long day at the office. Suddenly, a deafening alarm pierced the silence, causing Karen to jump in fright. The blaring siren reverberated through the space, and flashing red lights illuminated the area. Her heart raced as she frantically searched for the source of the disturbance. "What's going on?" she cried out, her voice trembling. Just then, the side door burst open, and two men in black tactical gear stormed in, their weapons drawn. "Hands up. Don't move," one of the men shouted, his voice gruff and authoritative. Karen froze, her hands raised in surrender. "Please, I don't know what's happening," she pleaded, her voice shaking. The men quickly subdued her, roughly binding her wrists behind her back. Karen's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. She had only come to retrieve her car, but now she found herself in the middle of what seemed to be a high-stakes operation. "What did I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're under arrest for the possession of illegal weapons and explosives," the other man stated, his tone devoid of emotion. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? No, there must be some mistake. I don't have any weapons or explosives," she protested, her voice growing more frantic. The men ignored her pleas, roughly shoving her towards the exit. As they marched her out of the garage, Karen noticed a strange device mounted on the wall, its red lights blinking ominously. "Wait, what is that?" she asked, her voice laced with fear. "That's the alarm you just triggered," one of the men replied, his grip tightening on her arm. "Didn't you know this place was rigged?" Karen's stomach dropped as the realization sank in. Somehow, she had stumbled into a dangerous situation, and now her freedom hung in the balance. As she was led away, she couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up in this predicament, and what consequences she would have to face. The two armed men hustled Karen into the back of an unmarked van, their movements swift and efficient. Her heart pounded in her chest as the vehicle lurched forward, the siren's wail fading in the distance. "Please, you have to believe me. I had no idea that place was rigged," Karen pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. The men remained silent, their focus unwavering as they navigated the busy city streets. Karen's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. How could she have stumbled into something so clearly illegal? After what felt like an eternity, the van pulled into a nondescript government facility. Karen was roughly led inside, her hands still bound behind her back. The stark, sterile environment only heightened her sense of unease. She was ushered into a small interrogation room and left alone, the sound of the door locking behind her. Karen sank into the chair, her mind whirling with 1,000 unanswered questions. What would happen to her? How could she prove her innocence? After what felt like hours, the door swung open, and a stern-faced agent entered the room. He took a seat across from Karen, his gaze piercing. "Ms. Wilson, I'm Agent Simmons with the FBI. You're in a lot of trouble," he said, his tone grave. Karen felt her heart skip a beat. "Please, you have to understand. I had no idea that place was some kind of front for illegal activities. I was just going to my car," she pleaded, her voice tinged with desperation. Agent Simmons leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "The evidence suggests otherwise. The alarm you triggered was connected to a sophisticated network of weapons and explosives caches. We've been monitoring that location for months." Karen's breath caught in her throat. "But I swear, I'm innocent. I'm just a regular person, working a 9-to-5 job. I have no connection to any of this," she insisted, her eyes wide with fear. The agent's expression remained unchanged. We'll see about that. In the meantime, you're going to be spending some time with us, he said, standing up and motioning to the guards. As Karen was led away, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. She had stumbled into a world she never knew existed, and now her very freedom hung in the balance. The thought of being locked away, branded a criminal, filled her with a profound sense of helplessness. Karen sat alone in her cell, the harsh fluorescent lights casting an unearthly glow on the bare concrete walls. She hugged her knees to her chest, her mind racing with a torrent of emotions: fear, confusion, and a desperate need to prove her innocence. How had her simple trip to the garage turned into this nightmare? She replayed the events in her mind, searching for any clue that might explain the surreal situation she found herself in. Suddenly, the sound of a key turning in the lock jolted her from her thoughts. The door swung open, and Agent Simmons strode in, his expression grave. "Ms. Wilson, I have some questions for you," he said, taking a seat across from her. Karen straightened her posture, steeling herself for the interrogation. "Please, you have to believe me. I had no idea that place was involved in anything illegal," she pleaded, her voice tinged with desperation. Agent Simmons regarded her with a cool, calculating gaze. "That's a bold claim, considering the evidence we've uncovered. The alarm you triggered was connected to a sophisticated network of weapons and explosives caches. We've been monitoring that location for months." Karen shook her head vehemently. "I swear, I'm just a regular person. I work a 9-to-5 job, and I've never been involved in anything like this before," she insisted. The agent leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Then how do you explain the fact that your fingerprints were found on several of the explosive devices?" Karen's heart sank. "What? No, that's impossible. I've never even seen those devices, let alone touched them," she cried, her voice laced with panic. Agent Simmons held up a hand, silencing her. "We have evidence that suggests you were a key player in this operation. Your alibi doesn't hold up, and we've traced your movements to the garage on multiple occasions." Karen felt her throat constrict, her mind reeling. "That can't be true. I've never been to that garage before today," she protested, her voice barely above a whisper. The agent's expression hardened. "We'll see what the forensics team has to say about that. In the meantime, I suggest you start thinking about how you're going to explain yourself." With that, he stood up and headed for the door, leaving Karen alone with her mounting dread. How could she possibly prove her innocence when the evidence seemed to be stacked against her? As the door closed, a single tear rolled down Karen's cheek. She had stumbled into a nightmare, and now her very freedom hung in the balance. As the hours ticked by, Karen's mind raced, searching for a way out of her predicament. The evidence the FBI had uncovered seemed to paint a damning picture, and she knew she needed to find a way to prove her innocence before it was too late. Suddenly, the door to her cell swung open, and a young woman in a crisp white blouse entered. Karen perked up, hoping this might be her chance to plead her case. "Ms. Wilson, I'm Agent Page, and I'd like to talk to you about your situation," the woman said, her voice calm and measured. Karen sat up, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. "Please, you have to believe me. I had no idea that place was involved in anything illegal," she pleaded. Agent Page held up a hand, silencing her. "I understand your concern, but the evidence we've gathered is quite compelling. Your fingerprints were found on several explosive devices, and we have records of you visiting the garage on multiple occasions." Karen felt her heart sink. "But that can't be true. I've never been to that garage before, and I certainly haven't touched any explosives," she insisted, her voice trembling. The agent regarded her with a cool, professional gaze. "I'm afraid the forensic evidence tells a different story, Ms. Wilson. We have reason to believe you were a key player in this operation." Karen shook her head, her mind racing. "No, you have to listen to me. I'm just a regular person, working a 9-to-5 job. I have no connection to any of this, I swear. Agent Page leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. I understand your concern, and I'm willing to listen. But you need to help me understand how your fingerprints ended up on those devices. Karen's hands trembled as she ran them through her hair. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe someone planted them there, or maybe it's all a mistake. But I had nothing to do with this, I promise. The agent nodded, her gaze thoughtful. All right, Ms. Wilson. I'm willing to explore other possibilities, but you need to help me understand what's really going on here. Karen felt a glimmer of hope flicker to life. Please, you have to believe me. I'm just an innocent bystander who got caught up in something I had no part in. I'll do anything to prove my innocence. Agent Page's expression hardened slightly. That's a bold claim, Ms. Wilson. But if you're telling the truth, then you need to start providing us with some answers. The evidence we have is quite damning, and time is not on your side. Karen nodded, her heart pounding. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. Just please, help me prove my innocence. The agent stood up, her gaze locking with Karen's. Very well. We'll start by going over the evidence again, and see if we can find any discrepancies. But you need to be completely honest with me, Ms. Wilson. Your freedom may depend on it. As the agent left the cell, Karen felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone was willing to listen to her side of the story. But the weight of the evidence still hung heavy on her mind, and she knew she had a long, uphill battle ahead of her. Over the next few hours, Karen sat with Agent Page, poring over every detail of the evidence the FBI had gathered. She answered question after question, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. I'm telling you, I've never been to that garage before, and I certainly haven't had anything to do with explosives or weapons, Karen insisted, her eyes pleading with the agent to believe her. Agent Page regarded her with a thoughtful expression. Your story is certainly compelling, Ms. Wilson, but the forensic evidence seems to paint a very different picture. Karen shook her head vehemently. There must be some kind of mistake. Maybe someone else was using my identity, or maybe the evidence was planted. But I swear, I had nothing to do with this. The agent sighed, her brow furrowed. I want to believe you, Ms. Wilson, but the facts are difficult to ignore. Your fingerprints were found on multiple explosive devices, and we have surveillance footage of you entering the garage on several occasions. Karen's heart sank. No, that can't be true. I've never set foot in that place before today, she protested, her voice growing desperate. Agent Page held up a hand, silencing her. I understand your frustration, but the evidence is simply too overwhelming to ignore. Unless you can provide us with a credible explanation, I'm afraid you're going to be facing some very serious charges. Karen felt a lump forming in her throat. But I don't have an explanation. I'm just a regular person, trying to live my life. I've never been involved in anything like this before, she pleaded, her eyes brimming with tears. The agent's expression softened slightly. I'm willing to explore other possibilities, Ms. Wilson, but you need to help me understand what's really going on here. If you're truly innocent, then we need to find a way to prove it. Karen nodded, her mind racing. Okay. What else can I do? I'll do anything, just please, help me clear my name. Agent Page leaned back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. Well, for starters, we need to find out how your fingerprints ended up on those devices. Do you have any idea who might have access to your identity? Karen shook her head, her brow furrowed. No, I don't know anyone who would do something like that. I live a pretty quiet life, and I can't think of anyone who would want to frame me for something like this. The agent nodded, her expression grim. All right, then we'll need to dig deeper. Is there anyone you can think of who might have had a motive to set you up? Karen racked her brain, desperately searching for any clues that might help her case. I don't know, I really don't. I can't think of anyone who would want to do this to me. Agent Page sighed, her gaze thoughtful. Well, we'll keep investigating. In the meantime, I need you to think very carefully about your movements and any potential connections you might have to this case. The more information you can provide, the better chance we have of uncovering the truth. Karen nodded, her heart pounding. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. Just please, help me prove my innocence. The agent stood up, her expression grave. That's what I intend to do, Ms. Wilson. But the clock is ticking, and the evidence against you is mounting. We need to move fast if we're going to clear your name. As the agent left the room, Karen felt a surge of determination. She knew her freedom was hanging by a thread, but she refused to give up. She would do whatever it took to prove her innocence and reclaim her life. As the days passed, Karen's frustration and fear only grew. Despite her unwavering cooperation with the FBI, the evidence against her seemed to mount with each passing hour. Agent Page had done her best to advocate for Karen, but the forensic evidence was simply too damning to ignore. The fingerprints, the surveillance footage, it all pointed to Karen's involvement in the illegal weapons and explosives operation. I don't understand, Karen cried, her voice laced with desperation. How can this be happening to me? I'm just an ordinary person, living a normal life. I've never been involved in anything like this before. Agent Page regarded her with a sympathetic expression. I believe you, Ms. Wilson, but the facts are what they are, and the evidence is quite compelling. Unless we can find a way to poke holes in the case against you, I'm afraid you're facing some very serious charges. Karen's heart sank. But I've told you everything I know. I've racked my brain trying to think of anyone who might want to frame me, but I can't come up with a single person. I'm completely innocent, I swear. The agent sighed, her brow furrowed. I understand, Ms. Wilson. But the reality is, the FBI has a very strong case against you. Unless we can uncover some new evidence or find a viable alternative explanation, I'm afraid your chances of avoiding prosecution are slim. Karen felt the weight of the world crashing down on her. She had always been a law-abiding citizen, someone who played by the rules and minded her own business. How could she have found herself in the middle of such a high-stakes, dangerous situation? Please, Agent Page, you have to help me. I can't go to prison, I just can't. I have a life, a job, a future. This can't be happening to me, she pleaded, her voice trembling. The agent reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Karen's arm. I'm doing everything I can, Ms. Wilson. But the truth is, the odds are stacked against you at the moment. We need to find a way to turn the tide, and fast. Karen's mind raced, desperately searching for a solution. What if we can find the person who actually committed these crimes? The one who set me up? Surely that would prove my innocence. Agent Page nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's an excellent idea, Ms. Wilson. If we can identify the real culprit, it would go a long way towards exonerating you. The problem is, we don't have any leads to go on. Karen's eyes widened with sudden realization. Wait, what about the previous tenant of that garage? Surely, they must have had something to do with this. The agent's eyes narrowed as she considered the possibility. That's an interesting angle, Ms. Wilson. If the previous tenant had connections to the illegal activity, it could explain how your fingerprints ended up on the explosive devices. Karen leaned forward, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Exactly. All we have to do is track down the previous tenant and see what they know. Surely, they must have had something to do with this. Agent Page nodded, her expression determined. All right, Ms. Wilson. I'll have my team look into the previous tenant immediately. If we can find a connection there, it could be the key to clearing your name. As the agent left the room, Karen felt a surge of relief. Finally, she had a glimmer of hope. If they could uncover the real culprit, she might just have a chance of reclaiming her freedom and her life. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Agent Page and her team worked tirelessly to track down the previous tenant of the garage. Karen's hopes rose with each new development, but she couldn't shake the lingering fear that her freedom was still hanging by a thread. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Agent Page returned to Karen's cell, a triumphant glint in her eye. "Ms. Wilson, we found something," she announced, her tone laced with a cautious optimism. Karen sat up straight, her heart pounding. "What is it? Did you find the previous tenant?" Agent Page nodded, her expression grave. "Yes, we did. And the information we've uncovered is quite disturbing." Karen leaned forward, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Please tell me, what did you find?" The agent took a deep breath before continuing. The previous tenant of the garage, a man named Michael Donovan, had a long history of involvement in illegal arms and explosives trafficking. We've uncovered evidence that he was the mastermind behind the operation you're being accused of. Karen felt a wave of relief wash over her. "So, you're saying I'm innocent? That this Donovan person is the one who planted the evidence against me?" Agent Page nodded solemnly. "That appears to be the case, Ms. Wilson. The forensic analysis of the devices you were found with matches Donovan's known methods, and we've traced his movements to the garage on multiple occasions." Karen couldn't believe her ears. "But how is that possible? How did he manage to frame me so convincingly?" The agent's expression darkened. "Based on our investigation, it seems Donovan had been planning this for some time. He likely obtained your fingerprints through some means and then used them to make it appear as if you were involved in the illegal activities." Karen felt a surge of relief, but also a deep sense of anger. "That bastard. How dare he do this to me? I've done nothing wrong, and now I've been dragged into this nightmare." Agent Page placed a reassuring hand on Karen's arm. "I understand your anger, Ms. Wilson, but the important thing is that we've uncovered the truth. Now, we need to work on clearing your name and bringing Donovan to justice." Karen nodded, her resolve hardening. "What do we need to do? I'll do whatever it takes to make sure this never happens to anyone else." The agent's expression turned determined. "First, we need to gather all the evidence we can against Donovan. Then, we'll work with the prosecution to ensure he's held accountable for his crimes. As for you, we'll make sure your name is completely cleared." Karen felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you, Agent Page. I can't tell you how grateful I am for your help. I knew I couldn't have been involved in something like this." As the agent left the room, Karen finally allowed herself to feel a sense of hope. She had been through hell, but now, with the truth on her side, she knew she had a fighting chance of reclaiming her life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as the FBI worked tirelessly to build their case against Michael Donovan. Karen, now free from the constraints of her cell, watched with a mixture of relief and anticipation as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Agent Page had been true to her word, relentlessly pursuing every lead and leaving no stone unturned. The evidence they uncovered was damning. Donovan's fingerprints on the explosive devices, his financial ties to the illegal arms trade, and even recordings of his conversations planning the elaborate framing of Karen. As the trial date approached, Karen felt a sense of both trepidation and determination. She knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one, but she was fueled by the knowledge that she was finally on the path to reclaiming her life. When the day of the trial arrived, Karen sat in the front row, her heart racing as the proceedings unfolded. She listened intently as the prosecution laid out their case, methodically dismantling Donovan's carefully constructed web of deceit. As the final witness took the stand, Karen held her breath, praying that the truth would finally prevail. To her immense relief, the jury's verdict was swift and decisive. Michael Donovan was found guilty on all charges, with the judge delivering a scathing rebuke of his actions. In the aftermath of the trial, Karen felt a sense of vindication, but also a deep well of emotion. She had been through a harrowing ordeal, one that had tested the very limits of her strength and resilience. Yet, through it all, she had refused to give up, trusting in the justice system and the unwavering determination of Agent Page. As she stood outside the courthouse, basking in the warm glow of freedom, Karen knew that her life would never be the same. The scars of her experience would linger, but she was determined to move forward, to rebuild her life and reclaim the sense of normalcy she had once taken for granted. In the end, Karen's story had not unfolded as she had expected that fateful day in the garage, but it had taught her a valuable lesson, that even in the darkest of times, the truth has a way of finding the light.